and I'm going to turn it over to you, Matt.
Okay, glad to meet you all. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you and talk about my experiences with the afterlife. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have been for, let's see, how long is it now? 46 years. And I'm a researcher, scientist. I helped to develop 5 different therapy processes. Um, Very much a believer in science. And this is kind of the story of how my perspective changed, and I began to care about and learn how to connect with souls on the other side. Um, my son, Jordan, died 15 and a half years ago. He was um, attacked on the way home from work and murdered on the street. And at that point, I think I experienced what any parent feels, the loss of their child. Probably anyone who has lost anyone that matters to them deeply, is those two questions. Is this person I love, do they still exist? And the second question is, are they okay? Are they happy wherever they are? And those questions just burned in me. And I I began a journey to find Jordan. And it started with going to mediums and having kind of a one-sided conversation where the medium would report um, what they experienced Jordan saying or telling them. And there was some solace in that, but it was so one-sided and so limited that it really didn't lift me and Judy, my wife, very far. Um, Eventually, our quest led us to Alan Botkin, who is a psychologist like me and specializes in treating trauma like I do, and used for many years a treatment process called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And one day, Botkin, who was then working for the VA, made a small error, a mistake in the protocol for doing EMDR. I've done EMDR hundreds and hundreds of times, so I know it very well. He made a small mistake, and the client he was working with, who was dealing with profound grief, a man had lost a young girl when he was in Vietnam, a child that he loved very much and planned to adopt, and who ultimately died in his arms. Uh, and the EMDR process was to try to work through the grief. And instead, as a result of this small variation, the man actually communicated with that girl. Her name was Lee. And she told him amazing things, that she loved him, that she cared for him, that she was okay, and that she was so grateful for all the love that he had given her. And it transformed him. His trauma and his pain and his sense of grief was over, essentially. And so the promise of what Botkin called induced after death communication was really very um, alluring. And my wife and I went to Chicago to see him. And as a result of that process, I had the experience of hearing Jordan talk to me, and not in my mind, not in my head, but I could hear his voice from outside, and he was saying very specific things, and he was saying the things I had yearned to hear, which was that he loved us, he was watching over us, he was involved with us, he cared about our lives and was observing us, and that he was good and he was happy where he was. So that was a very big shift for me. I might say, in addition, that over the years since then, I have learned how to do induced after death communication. I'm not as good as Botkin. Botkin manages to do it most of the time. I can achieve it about 50% of the time. My clients who have had loss, but the experience of witnessing someone hearing, seeing, and in many cases actually feeling kinesthetically their loved one is so transformative. And of course, their experience is incredible lightness. The grief begins to dissipate immediately. Um, but the experience of witnessing that is extraordinary. And my own experience of what Botkin gave me uh, really has transformed my grief. So that was kind of the first real breakthrough for me in connecting to Jordan. The next thing that happened was I began to see uh, a therapist, Ralph Metzner, the late Ralph Metzner, famous man who pioneered uh, after death communication with lots of, and did a lot of research on it. And I had already learned how to do. Many maybe have heard about Michael Newton and his work in his book Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls. And Newton uh, had discovered a way to do not just past life regressions, but to bounce from past life to the life between life regret, to actually enter the people that he helped could actually enter the spirit world, could observe and experience what it was like in the afterlife. And he did this with 7,000 people before he wrote the book. And it's extraordinary. I mean, and I was very drawn to it because he was a psychologist like I am. He's a behavioral therapist like I am, and also a hypnotist, and I do a lot of hypnosis as well. So my experience was, oh my God, this is a guy like me, and he's able to learn about the life between lives. So I became really fascinated. This is even before Jordan died. I learned about him, and I learned how to do that regression. And I began to do it not professionally, not charging people for it, but with anybody I loved, anybody I cared for who wanted to do it, I would do it, and I got to witness them enter the afterlife. Then with Ralph Metzner, after Jordan died, he did those essentially similar regressions with me, and I was able to enter a past life. In which case, in this particular past life, I was living in the, I don't know, 1700s, maybe 1800s, with Jordan, and Jordan was my wife in that life, not my son. And I was able to progress to the end of that life, my death, and then to the experience in the afterlife, and to see Jordan there. It was a very powerful experience and something I'm so grateful for. And so I got to encounter Jordan that way by going into the life between lives and then meeting him in our soul group. So that was the second way that I got to encounter Jordan. Um, but the thing that really transformed my experience and made it possible for me to communicate more directly with Jordan was when Metzner taught me to do channeled communication. And it didn't take much. And I'll tell you all what I learned and how I do it. So if you have any interest or desire to use the methods that I learned, you're totally welcome to it. But it didn't take Metzner more than an hour, maybe less than that, to teach me the basic process. And I went home that night and I did it. and it was transformative because I was able to have a conversation with Jordan. Everything else had been one-sided. I was receiving experiences, receiving words, receiving some communications, but not able to engage in an actual reciprocal conversation. And so for the first time ever, I could ask questions, receive answers, ask another question, receive answers, give a response, receive a response back from Jordan. And it made all the difference for me in you know, Botkin's work had been very helpful. The induced after death communication had meant a lot, and hearing Jordan meant a lot. But then being able to have a conversation in the same way over so many years, we'd have conversations around the kitchen table and just talk about everything. And there was such a beautiful uh, connection between us in which we just could explore and think about things together. And now finally, I could do that again, but now with my son uh, in the afterlife, and also a soul that now had full range of experience. He remembered all of his past lives. He remembers all of the learning he's experienced, both on earth, but also in the afterlife. And so all of his wisdom is, is available, as is any of you, for any of you who have loved ones on the other side, all of their wisdom is available. And they can offer and bring to you a perspective that is so rich and deep and true. Um, and that's what I experienced with Jordan. I began to have these conversations. I've had hundreds and hundreds of conversations. Generally speaking, I channel with him once a week. Um, and in the course of these conversations, um, he certainly, helped me with very specific things like, what do I do about this or that? His sister, is having this problem. What should I do? I mean, so he's often been able to help me with very specific recommendations and support. But he's gone so far beyond that. He's been able to tell me about his own experience in the afterlife, what that world is like for him, what he's done there and been through there. But also he's reincarnated again. He's able to tell me about his new life and what that experience is like. And so I have this sense of continuity. There's the life of Jordan, and then there's this new life as well, and this and also the sense of past lives that we shared. And Ralph and I explored not just the past life where he was my wife, but a number of others. So there's this sense of this relationship that's gone over time and over multiple lifetimes, and all that we've learned together. So he could explore that with me, but he also is able to, with if I ask him questions, to kind of reveal some of the deepest things about the nature of the afterlife, the spirit world, what happens there, the nature of reality. What is this thing that we live in? Uh, is it real? Is it a dream? What is it? Um, so he's been able to share so much with me, and I'm so grateful for what he's taught me, and I've passed that on to others in the form of some of the books I've written. First one was just Seeking Jordan and the whole story of finding him, but other things, the luminous landscape of the afterlife, and um, love in the time of impermanence, and lessons from the afterlife. And these are all things that he's taught me, and that he wanted me to pass on. He'd outline these books in a matter of 5 minutes, and then over a year or so, he would essentially dictate what needed to be in the book. So I've been very privileged to have him share all of that with me, and his desire was then to pass it on and share it with others. And before we end, let's leave time for um, describing the steps that he taught me, or Ralph Messner taught me to do the channel communication. I'm happy to pass it on to you. I know a lot of you are doing that yourself, and you have your own methods. And if there's anything that I have to offer that would be valuable, I'm happy to do it. So with that in mind, and just saving time at the end for that, I'm be very happy to just answer any questions you have or any things you want to explore with me. I'm happy to go wherever you want to go.
Does anyone have questions at this point? I sort of have a question, and I don't know if I can articulate it so that it makes sense, but I think in the past, I sort of expected everyone in the afterlife to have the same kinds of experiences, sort of, that's not exactly right, but I hear different perceptions about the afterlife from different people. And I just wondered if you have anything to say about that. I mean, obviously here on Earth, we've got 8 billion perspectives on life, and people may be living the same life and not have the same experiences. But what does Jordan tell you about that?
There are different aspects to the afterlife, and sometimes, for example, people who have near-death experiences, they only get as far as the landing place in the afterlife, which is actually adjacent to the spirit world. That's as far as they get, and they describe the experience of guides and loved ones, connecting to them and so forth and so on. But that's what they're describing is a very small adjacent area to the afterlife. Other people uh, enter bardos, healing bardos, where they recuperate from some of the pain and emotional trauma of a life on Earth. Um, some of these bardos, they get to work through some of their struggles, and these bardos are designed to teach them important things. You can't get into the spirit world if you're full of pain and anger and fear. I mean, those emotions really prevent access to the actual spirit world. So there are bardos where all that healing and learning can take place. So sometimes people are reporting about those bardos, not the actual spirit world. And then there are multiple aspects to the spirit world. Once you get in there, I mean, first of all, there's a soul group and our relationship to the soul group, and where we all have this deep kind of family connection and we learn together. And then there are adjacent soul groups and our relationships there. And we have guides who help and oversee the learning process in our soul group. So there's all kinds of experiences there. Um, there are, the first step in the afterlife is going through the life review process. And some souls just really are very focused on that, and they report uh, about that. And the life review process is a very powerful experience. I mean, so I'm sure some of you are aware of it. Um, but it's an experience in which we look at every single choice that we made in the course of an entire lifetime and experience that choice not only from our own point of view of making the choice and how that felt and so forth, but we experience the choice for how it impact every other soul that was affected by that choice, and not only at that moment, but over time.
I'd
So,
like water, please, with lemon. I'd like iced tea, please.
are we okay to continue? I mean, I
So,
heard.
no,
I'm hearing,
somebody just
something else
came
going on.
in
Okay,
and then
so
didn't mute. So yes, we're good.
so experience every choice we make, not only from our own point of view, but from the experience of every other person, their entire experience of that choice and how it affected them over time. It's a very powerful experience that goes on, and it's a long review process. Some souls are just reporting that back, and that's what the afterlife is for them, or that's what they tell us about the afterlife. Other aspects of the afterlife have to do with review of the Akashic record, learning about, um, all of the experiences of our life, but not just the experiences and choices we made, but what would have happened if we did something differently? And we get to look at it, a completely different branch of the Akashic record, a potential of what would have happened had we done X instead of Y. And so there's a lot of studying about that. that goes on. And and some souls will describe the afterlife as kind of like a library where they keep reviewing and experiencing and learning about not only their life but other lives as well. So and then there's other aspects to the afterlife. There's a lot of fun. There's a lot of joy. There's music. There's actual games. There's lots of visiting and encountering that goes on. There's merging, where souls actually merge together and connect to each other in a very beautiful way. And there's merging with all, where souls for very relatively short periods of time will merge with all and have experienced huge downloads of knowledge and awareness. Um, and there's tourism, where souls will go to other worlds and observe and learn, and even other dimensions, and learn and observe what goes on there. And then there's the whole process of spiritual, where careers. So souls in the afterlife, many of the souls in the afterlife are developing spiritual careers. They're learning how to be guides. They're learning how to be healers. They're learning how to essentially to be creators. So there's lots of different spiritual careers that souls are getting training and are developing skills that are pertinent to those careers. So this is just so the afterlife. When people get back to us and tell us a little bit about it, or somehow they've had some contact with the afterlife, sometimes they're just telling us one part of it. There are many, many, many pieces to the afterlife, and both before you get there in terms of the landing place and the bardos, but in the afterlife itself, there are many parts of the experience, all of which are helping us learn, but are multifaceted.
Hey, go ahead, Peg.
I would like for you to explain how you communicate with Jordan after he's reincarnated. How does that work?
Well, there's a Hindu concept of Atman and Jiva, and basically the idea is that our soul, part of our soul, always resides in the afterlife. And this is something that Michael Newton made very clear in his work with individuals with whom he did those life between life hypnotic regressions. So part of our soul always lives in the afterlife. Part of our soul is always there. In fact, you can learn how to communicate to your soul that is currently in the afterlife and has all the wisdom that you've accumulated from your many lives and many experiences. So part of our soul remains there. And then when we incarnate, part of our soul energy enters a physical body on some planet. So I can communicate to Jordan because some of his soul energy always remains in the afterlife, as does mine, as does all of yours. And even though he's incarnating, only part of his energy is in that young woman that he's now become. And so it's a really beautiful thing in some ways that we continue, in spite of the fact that we incarnate and we live in various planets and live in bodies, that we continue to live at the same time in the afterlife, and all of our relationships there continue simultaneously with our experiences here. Now, let me give you another example. When we're in a soul group, very often soul group members will incarnate together, and they become like a little repertory theater where they show up on Earth at about the same time in similar places, and each incarnation they'll have different relationships, and they'll have a different play that they're engaged in, a different set of circumstances that they're all facing. But at the same time, they tend to reincarnate together into that spot. And so we're always but meanwhile, while they're doing that and incarnating together and living out another play, another life, they're all still in the afterlife in the same soul group. Part of their energy remains there, and they continue to relate to each other in the spirit world.
Thank you.
So anybody else? This group is not usually so quiet. Heidi first, and then Kim.
Hi, okay, I just have a question. When the group that remains in the afterlife, is there and our loved ones pass so that they have returned, are they are seeing us there, but they are also seeing us here, like brokenhearted?
Yeah. So
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, how has he, what is it like for them to see people be in utter anguish? And I just can't imagine such a thing. Yeah.
Well, they do see us and they are aware of us. They're able to observe our lives. Jordan actually, you know, knows all about our life. I mean, he's observing it frequently. He's with us frequently. Yesterday, I was working with somebody that he loves very much, and she was saying, "Oh my God, he's here! He's right here with us." And she's had lots of contact with him over the years, but she was very. I wasn't aware that he was there, but she was aware. So the souls who have passed are very aware of us, and it's true that they're aware of our pain. But how do I say this? They have a kind of a different relationship to pain than we do, because we think that this is all there is. We experience, I've lost, the person's gone. Oh my God, it's it's horrible. It's just the worst pain. I mean, I I don't need to tell you, and you don't need to tell me. We both know what that
Yeah.
pain is. It's the worst, and they're aware of that. And they're often actually trying to make contact with us. Sometimes we're not able to hear and we're not able to get it, but they're often trying to make contact with us to kind of reassure us that it's okay. But even if they're not fully able to make contact with us, they are very concerned about us. But they see pain differently. They've lived hundreds of lives. We've lived hundreds of lives. And when you've lived hundreds of lives and in those lives you've faced death many times, you've lost dear ones many times. I've lost Jordan before in other lives. It death looks different, and you experience death differently. It's not a tragedy. It's a transition. And of course, because we have amnesia, when we come to this earth, we don't remember that we have this other life, and we don't remember what the spirit world is like, and we don't remember that all the people we lose they're still there, and actually all the people we lose are still available to us, and we can make contact with them, and our love, the love that exists between us, still is there, and we don't fully grasp that, and so the loss is so profound. On the other side, the loved ones feel our loss, but see it in the perspective of many lives, and that nothing is really lost. None of those people who died are lost. They're still there, and the love is still there, and the connection is still there. So you see, they see it somewhat differently. They appreciate our pain, but they also see that we are still connected, and the love continues regardless of whether a person has transitioned to the other side.
Well, I would love more than anything to do what you figured out to do. So thank you.
I'm happy to teach you what I know. I'm glad to teach. I've taught hundreds and hundreds of people how to channel, and most people can do it. So I'm happy to do it, but I appreciate what you're saying. The pain is enormous, and God knows I've 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 been there and I felt it. And I still feel it. I miss Jordan, the physical person, my son, who I could hug. I miss so much. But at the same time, the relationship and the love continues, and that makes it different. It's not a, 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 a blackness, a primary and unmitigated loss. It's I've lost his physical self, but the love is still there, and that's what I hope you can discover as well.
Thank you.
Kim had a question, and then Susan.
Okay, I've been rapidly taking notes and writing out my questions as we've been going along. So thank you so much for being here. This is so fascinating. Um, at some point you were talking about you were hearing Jordan in your head, and it kind of cut out for me. I wasn't sure if you said you heard him in your head or outside of your head.
No, in the induced after death communication, what I experienced with Alan Botkin, it was outside of my head. It was communicating from outside of my body. It wasn't inter. Now, when I do channeling, his voice is inside my head. It's his own way of talking, his own way of communicating, his own use of language, and he's telling me things often I have no knowledge of or never even occurred to me. So I feel the authenticity of his voice. But in that moment with Alan Botkin in the EMDR experience, induced after communication, I heard him from outside. And when I do it with clients and I've been successful, they experience it as it is actually happening. They can feel physically the person that they love and hug them. They can hear them as if speaking from the outside. They can see them as if they were in the room. So it really is an experience of outside of the body.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Also, when you saw him, again, I was going in order, so this must be in the after death communication part. When you
I
saw,
didn't see him. I heard him and induced after. I only heard him. I didn't see him.
okay, so when you're communicating with him, is it, you kind of were alluding to it when you were just responding before? Is it like in a download? Is it something that you're interpreting? Is it kind of like using all your senses? You're seeing things, you're hearing things, you're feeling things, you're knowing things. You know, how is there interpretation on your part, or is it strictly like I am clearly getting this information as if it's typewritten or spoken?
It doesn't feel like there's interpretation going on, although I'm having, all right, so there's different ways that souls communicate to us, and I've had all the different ones with Jordan. One way is what I call the download, where you get knowledge and these concepts and ideas, and then you have to go find the words, to make sense and describe them. But it's like one time he downloaded an entire psychotherapy process to me, an entire process in the space of maybe two minutes, and including images and but then I had to go find the words to describe it and then build a treatment process and then actually did it and researched it and then created the therapy, but it was all based on this download that happened in 2 minutes.
Understand.
In other cases, it's just sometimes it's rapid fire. It's almost like I can't keep up with writing as fast as I'm hearing what he has to say. In other cases, it's a few words. It's very compressed. It's like a couple of three words, a phrase, and it's meant to be something that I take in and use in some way. And my experience is that people generally, when they're doing communication with the afterlife, channel writing, they at times will eventually have all three types of communication. And oh, by the way, sometimes it's just imagery. I recently taught somebody to do channel communication with their dad who was deceased. And all he did was show her pictures, 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 and he'd show her sequences and events as a sequence of images that had happened before she was born, as a way of explaining himself and making sense of who he was and who he was to her. And so that's another thing that you can just get images and not even words, and then you have to kind of put them together and make some sort of meaning out of it. So there's multiple ways that spirits will communicate with us. Some tend to use one form rather than another, but at least my experience with Jordan is that he's used all of those forms in one time. Not imagery very much. I don't get much imagery from, but the download, the rapid fire, the compressed communicate, all of those he's done.
I understand. Okay. I still have more questions, but I don't want to hog the time. So let's get other people and then I'll just come back.
Yeah, we've got two more, and then if there's time, we can come back to you, Kim. Thank you. Susan was next, and then Christine. Go ahead, Susan.
I just wanted to say that I've studied a lot with Newton and everything that you had said about the spirits being in different places. I truly understand. The question I had is, do you use a metronome? Do you use some kind of sound when you do the EMDR?
No, not at all. Well, wait a minute. I take that back.
Okay.
Well, I mean, traditionally EMDR, as you know, you just move your fingers back and forth.
Right.
The person
Right.
falls. I have a trauma clinic, a little low-fee trauma clinic in Berkeley, and we see lots of folks there who have PTSD. And we use EMDR machines, and the machine involves sound, so that there's alternate sound one ear and then the other, and then these little vibrating buds that you hold in your hand. So you have two different vehicles for creating alternate stimulation, and so the sound and the vibrating bud are synchronized together, and they go back and forth. And bilateral stimulation, it's called, and it turns out it has a very powerful effect for people. It creates an altered state, and it helps to remedy the pain of trauma.
So it's been probably over a year ago, but I can't think of the lady's name. I tried. She kind of used the EMDR with the eye movement, and she had me listen to a metronome, and I got there, but I didn't get there.
Was it creating sound on one ear and then the other? One ear and then the other?
Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock.
I don't think a metronome would work because the sound is coming from the same spot.
Right.
That would not induce bilateral stimulation or EMDR, because the sound is all emanating from one spot. For EMDR, the sound has to be one side, then the other, one side, then the other. The stimulation,
like the Monroe, like I do a lot with. I try to do through the Monroe Institute, and they do the bilateral. They do the hemisync. Anyhow, I don't want to take everybody's time.
it has to be
Are you
bilateral.
going to put your contact information? How can we get your contact information?
You can send me an email, Matt, M-A-T-T, at New Harbinger, N-E-W, H as in Harry, A-R-B, B as in boy, I-N-G-E-R.com.
Okay.
I'm going to interject here because you're talking about that. Joyce Smith, who she was trained by,
Francine Shapiro.
No, oh God, is it Ramona? No, it starts with an R. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But she was trained in EMDR, and I worked with her on it for a while. But she was coming to our group. She's a therapist, obviously, and she has now a session at the time, so she can't meet with us. But while she was meeting with us, we were doing, because our focus originally was on automatic writing, and we got a meditation, a short meditation specifically for that. And she set it to music using binaural beats. And so for any of you who don't have that, I usually send it in the spreadsheet when somebody comes the first time, and I send you all our resources. It's in there. And if you don't have it, let me know, and I'd be happy to send you a link to that recording.
There are many methods for opening the channel. I'll teach you a meditation that I use. There's also auto hypnosis to open the channel. Simple prayer can open the channel. Certain kinds of sounds, repetitive sounds like drumming and other sounds can open the channel. So there's anything that can actually begin a kind of an altered state and a state of receptivity will work to open the channel. So there's multiple methods. I'm agreeing with you. I'm just supporting what you're saying. That all makes total sense to me.
Okay, Christine.
Hello, and thank you for sharing this information. and your experience. As you were talking about how we have a central location for our soul, and then we have different aspects of it in different places. I was thinking kind of an analogy. It's like a crystal almost. It's like one of these crystals. How each crystal has a facet, has a side. It's all one, but each crystal has different facets, so it's experiencing existence on a different level. And I think I'm grasping what you're saying, and it's fascinating. And thank you so much.
Well, each soul, yes, has different facets. The part of the soul that lives always in the afterlife is very complex, multifaceted. And then the part of the soul that enters the physical universe is dealing with different facets and issues. But actually, this whole thing about crystals and facets is much bigger than that, in my view. All, which we are a part of, all, or God, we're all pieces of God. So God is the big crystal, and we are all little facets, individual consciousness. And what Jordan says is the reason we come to Earth, the reason we incarnate, is a sacred mission to learn. We come here to learn. Of course, we face all this pain, and the pain is largely what teaches us. Pain isn't failure; it's the medium through which we learn so much and gain so much wisdom. So we come here to learn, primarily learning how to love in the face of pain, in the face of all the barriers that exist in the physical world. And all of what we learn is then uploaded to all. We're all pieces of all. We're all facets of the big crystal, and everything we learn and experience then becomes part of the awareness and the knowledge of all. All continues to evolve and develop just as we continue to evolve and develop. So that's something that Jordan really emphasizes a lot, that we have a sacred mission here. We're not here, suffering and all the stuff we go through isn't just some, unfortunate hardship. It's something we do to evolve and learn, not just as individual souls, but also in our work to help all evolve and learn.
It's been great. Thank you so much. Okay.
You said that you would be able to teach us. I don't, how long are you going to come back and spend some more time with us, or how long could it be?
About 10 minutes. I mean, can you go a little bit over the half hour?
Sure.
Okay, I can do it in about 10 minutes.
Okay. Kim, did you have something before we get to learn that?
Well, do you want to go to that and then I can just ask the questions after? What do you think, Matthew?
Sure, I'm happy to tell you right now how to do it, well, how I do it. And then again, there's no necessarily one way, or the only way. This is just a way. It's the way that Ralph taught me, and it worked for me, and it's worked for hundreds of other people. So basically, what I would encourage you to do, if you want to speak to someone on the other side, is to get a talisman, something that represents that person, that soul, something that they gave you, something you gave them, something that they had. I mean, it could be anything. It doesn't matter. It's just something a physical object that connects you to that soul. And if you don't have an object that connects you to the soul, a photograph, or it might be even an image of something else that somehow relates to that soul, place you went to and loved together. So anyway, something physical that connects you to that soul. You need something for eye fixation. Candles usually work very well. I have a candle that my daughter gave me, she got in Mexico. It's a glass mask, and then behind it is the candle, flickers, and I can bring my attention to the candle. So you want something for eye fixation. So now you have that object that connects you, that special object, you have the candle. And you need a notebook, you need something to write on. I think it's really important for these communications to be written. And you'll ultimately write your question down, and then you'll write what you hear. as the answer. But having that notebook, I mean, I have many notebooks of the things Jordan has told me, and they're so precious to me. And I go back and read them periodically because, I can't remember everything he said. And I feel like, again, get to re-experience some of the wisdom that he gave me on that particular occasion. So writing these things down and holding on to them, they're precious. And I encourage you to use the notebook for that special purpose. So the next thing you do is you begin the process of opening the channel, and there are multiple ways to do that. The way I do it is a simple Vipassana meditation, a breath focused meditation. And so, you attend to the breath, you bring your attention down to your abdomen, to your diaphragm, bring all of your attention there. And then on each out breath, you note the breath. So the first out breath, you say to yourself 1, the next out breath, you say 2, the next out breath 3, and so forth. So every out breath you count, and you just note the breath by counting the out breath. And if so, that the first thing is bring your attention to your diaphragm. The second thing is note the breath by counting the out breath. And the third thing you do is when thoughts arise, notice the thought, but then bring your attention back to the breath and back to noting and counting the out breath. So thoughts always arise during meditation. That's okay. That's not a problem. But as soon as you notice the thought, gently return attention to your diaphragm, to your breath, and to noting each out breath. So if I'm in a kind of a quiet place or not very, activated, my mind isn't racing, I can often, get into a pretty receptive state in 10 out breaths. But sometimes that's not enough, and I don't feel like I'm there. I'll do another 10. And if I'm not there, I'll do another 10. And I'll keep going until I feel this sort of quietness settling in. My thoughts are getting a little further apart, and I'm starting to feel more open and receptive and more ready. Okay. So that's the beginning of opening the channel. And the next thing is that Ralph taught me is a divination, where you imagine this ball of light just a little bit above your head, the color of the sun. You can visualize it as you are finishing your meditation. Visualize that ball of light, and then imagine it elongating and turning into a tube of light, the color of the sun, and it goes all the way from the top of your head to your loved one. And as you imagine the tube elongating toward your loved one, just be aware of your loved one, be aware of your love for that soul. And in that moment, the channel opens. Ralph always used to say to me, our loved ones are just a thought away. And as soon as you think about them, you're starting to open the channel. Well, this is just a process to bring awareness of your loved one into full consciousness. And as you imagine the tube elongating, already reaching the loved one, and you know who you're sending this message to, and this beautiful person whom you love, you're opening the channel. The next thing you do is you open your notebook and you write your first question. Now, sometimes people like to think about what the question is before they open the channel. And that's fine. You can have an idea about what you want to ask, but literally write it down. And it turns out that the act of writing actually becomes part of the channeling process. It actually helps with the receptivity and the opening to the other on the other side. So just watch the words form of your question. And then what you do is wait a moment, and the answer will come in your mind. Now, here's the thing. Everybody has some amount of doubt about this. Like, well, yeah, but is this really me, or is this my loved one? That, where am I getting this? Um, and that's okay. There's a certain amount of doubt, and everybody who channels experiences a certain amount of doubt. I want to encourage you not to let that get in the way. Of course, it will show up. It's like, wait a minute, is this real? And allow that doubt. Just allow it. Accept it. Let it let it be there. But meanwhile, continue with the process. And so, meanwhile, you're waiting for something. So, and the very first word or words that show up in your mind, write them down. Doesn't matter what they are. Write them down. Just get started. Write down the first word, and you might say, Jordan sometimes says something, for something like, trees. And I'm like, the hell is that? What are you talking about? And I have to wait a minute for the next part of the message to show up. So write down whatever the first word or words are, and then wait for the next part. And sometimes it happens very haltingly, particularly in the beginning. You may find it somewhat halting, although not always. I had someone last week that I taught how to channel, and within 30 seconds of starting, they wrote they started doing channeling and wrote 5 pages of messages that they were getting. So sometimes it'll come out a lot. Sometimes it comes out very haltingly. That's okay. When you finally get to the end of the first sentence, that's fine. Just wait, see if there's anything more. If there's nothing more, that's fine. Write your next question. And sometimes your next question might relate to something that you just heard, or the message you just got, or it might be something else entirely that you want to know about. And then go through that process of waiting and allowing the first word or words to show up in your mind, noticing that there may be some doubt. That's okay. Just waiting for the first words, writing them down, whatever they are, finishing the sentence, waiting to see if there's more. Sometimes there'll be more. Sometimes there might be a lot more. That's okay. And just writing until you feel that is finished, that particular response is finished. Then at that point, you may have another question. Write that out and go through the same process, writing out the response that you get. And so again, and these responses may be received because they're telepathic. They may be received in different ways. Sometimes they may be these very focused kernels of wisdom, thought. Sometimes there's just a very massive amount of experience and words. Sometimes it's a download without words. Sometimes it's an image. It'll show up in different ways, but do your best then to put words to it so that you can have a record of the experience and the conversation you had with your loved one. At the end of the process, always thank your loved one. Always thank them for their willingness to share and to be with you. It was a visit. It's an act of love. And just appreciate and send them love yourself and gratitude for their continuing to be part of your life and continuing to give you support and continuing to send you love. So that's just, I think it's important to really send some gratitude to that love. That's it. That's the process that I use. It's not, as you can see, it's not very elaborate. And the other thing is, it doesn't require clairaudience. It doesn't require any kind of gift of mediumship. Believe me, I have none of that. I have none of those gifts. But it just requires willingness to engage in the process. And it's a ritual. And the more you use the ritual, the same candle, same candle holder, the same object that connects you, the same meditation process, the same notebook, maybe the same place you always do it. I always do it at a particular desk that I have that belonged to me as a little boy. And that desk sort of connects to my parents and ancestors and so forth. And so that's part of the ritual for me. So make it a ritual. And the ritual then can be a visit. And you can schedule it. You can decide, when do you want to have a visit with your loved one, and schedule it. engage in the ritual, and openly chant.
Do you think an electric candle is as maybe not as good as, but sufficient? Because I have a fear of fire, and so I don't use candles.
Electric candle's fine. Or you can do you can use a soft light of some kind that you can look at. Candles are nice just because they flicker. But you know, there are candles now that are just they're battery powered, and they have something that kind of waves back and forth and creates a flickering effect. And I think that would be ideal.
Yeah, I have. Sister Rosemary gave me one when she visited one time. So yes, great. Kim, did you have a last question?
I have about 3.
I'm happy to answer your questions if you guys want to stay on. I mean,
Sure. If it's okay with Peg.
Thank you.
This is Peg's room.
Oh, yay. Okay. All right. Okay. So my next question was, did Jordan say anything about reincarnating in, are we able as a soul over there, are we able to stop reincarnating when we want? And then if that's yes, then what is after not reincarnating? Creating, I imagine, but what do you say?
Souls get more and more involved in their spiritual career. And also they spend more time merging with all and getting huge downloads of knowledge, wisdom, joy. So there's and a lot more time merging with each other, you know, with other souls. I mean, and working together with other souls on projects. I mean, there's a lot of projects that exist, and also there's a lot of fun. Souls write music. Souls engage in all kinds of creative experiences. So there's even scientific investigation that goes on the other side. So there's lots of things to do after souls reach a point where they no longer feel a value in incarnating, or maybe they've gone through a lot of pain incarnating and they really just don't want to do it anymore. But they get to make that decision.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. And then I think you might have alluded to this, but I just wanted a little more clarity. When we are reincarnated, I understand what you were saying about part of us, our higher self, remains and is connected to our soul that's here right now, having this physical experience. So, we hear a lot of theories about like parallel lives all at the same time. So I was just wondering if Jordan mentioned anything about that. Is it one at a time, or are they like 10 concurrently? Did he comment about that?
He hasn't really said a whole lot about that to me. Newton said it's very rare for souls to have parallel lives. I mean, to divide their energy into more than one life or body. Although he did report in his book that it happens on occasion. Jordan hasn't described to me anything about parallel lives. He says we can drop into time at any place. And so, so you can drop into time at any place from the Stone Age or whenever souls began to inhabit bodies up to the end of the world. But souls typically do it sequentially because they want to go to a time that's not so terribly different from their last incarnation. So that's my last life, I died in the early 1940s. I was murdered in that particular life. And so I've come back not that far from that era. I was born in 1948. And so I get to live in a world with there are airplanes and there are cars and there are a lot of very familiar trains and things that are familiar. And so souls like to sort of come back to the next life in an environment that's somewhat familiar, but they could and do incarnate into different times. They can go into the future, they can go into the past, because the whole timeline of the earth is seen from spirit world. They can see everything that happened on the earth from beginning to end. In fact, we can see everything that's happened in the universe from beginning to end.
So, for example, the medieval time period
Yeah.
is not happening right now. It's linear, but from a spirit point of view, it's still
Yeah.
alive.
It's like we live at little points along a river, but in the spirit world, we see the whole river from its origin to where it enters the sea. We see the whole river of time, and we can enter it as in incarnations at any point in the river. But we can see it all from the spirit world. But as we live in physical lives, we enter we occupy a particular place on a particular bank of that river.
Okay, I love it. That's so fascinating. I think this question might help the whole group. There's the movie with Robin Williams called
What? Oh, she's frozen. I think she's referring to
and
Dreams May
I've
Come. Right? You froze.
yeah, am I okay, sorry. Yeah, the Robin Williams movie, What Dreams May Come. And I have heard that that movie is pretty close to what the spirit world, just to wrap it all up into one world, because one word, because you gave kind of those instances of when you first go over, and then there's other aspects there. But that movie is apparently kind of pretty close to what occurs, how the whole thing works, so to speak. My question is, has Jordan, or do you know of any current books or movies that we can go watch or read that the spirit world says this is a good outline, this pretty much works for how it is, and not just strictly like a textbook book, like, but like a creative, like a story, like What Dreams May Come.
Well, again,
Easy to digest.
what I said in the beginning is that different souls will report different aspects of the spirit world. So, so that different parts of it are emphasized. And so I mean, I wrote a book called The Luminous Landscape of the Afterlife. It's all channeled from Jordan. I mean, every word in it is channeled from Jordan, describing what the afterlife looks like and also how to prepare for death and transition into the afterlife. I mean, that's one thing that if you're interested, you might look at that.
Yes, please say the name again. I'm sorry. Please say the name of it again.
Called The Luminous Landscape of the Afterlife.
Giles put a link in the chat already.
Okay.
And there's another book that he channeled called Lessons from the Afterlife. And that is not so much about, that's not all about what the afterlife looks like. It's about why we come here, what the nature of reality is, the nature of matter and energy, the nature of the divine, what a soul is. I mean, it's sort of what is all this stuff, as opposed to just talking about the afterlife. So, I mean, there's some, and there are other, I mean, there's lots of books out there. I mean, I love Newton's book, Journey of Souls. I reread it periodically because it's so beautiful to me, and I really recommend that for anybody who's interested in kind of getting these transcripts of people describing what the afterlife looks like.
I have read that. It's just been so many years, so I'm gonna have to dig that back out. That was pretty, I mean, I could go on and on, but I'm gonna stop. But I'm so grateful for you being here, and thanks, Sheila, and Matt too. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy, we'll make yours the last question, if that's okay with everybody.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Matt, for your story, and sorry for your loss. But what a terrific gift you've been given. I too I've been channeling for years, following the death of my fiance 30 some years ago. My question to you is, how do you distinguish who is talking to you? How can you be sure it's Jordan versus, say, a spirit guide or an angel or somebody else?
That's a really wonderful question.
Is it trust? Is it just simply trust?
Part of it is I'm sending the message to Jordan. So I'm sending the spiritual message to an address. But you know, it's not entirely clear to me whether Jordan is always the primary one answering the question, because there's sometimes the answers come back with a kind of style of language that it doesn't exactly reflect Jordan, or that is reflecting some other entity that's there with him and part of the communication. There may be guides involved that I don't know, and it's funny, I've never really asked about it, um, but 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 I've noticed that there are some differences sometimes in terms of how the communication comes. Now, I a lot of it really is in Jordan's style of speech and his way of talking, but some of it not so much. And so I think there are probably other entities that may be involved. And I've had people tell me that, you know, when they're working, you know, other people they work with, souls on the other side, loved ones, they're talking to a committee. It's not just the soul, but it may be a whole group of people who are participating in the conversation who may not necessarily reveal their identities. So I guess I'm wanting to leave open the possibility that more than one entity might enter the conversation. Um, but they always seem to have your best interest at heart and and care deeply about you as the receiver of the communication. And I've never heard any soul or entity communicating something hurtful or harmful. It always seems to come from love. So there may
Yes.
be more than one. I guess and sometimes it's not entirely clear who's the predominant voice in the communication.
When this started for me, I wanted, of course, to speak with my deceased loved one. But what happened first was a signature came from the angels. I was doing automatic writing, and angels would sign it. So that's how I always considered myself channeling the angels. But then they would, depending on the question asked or like a different area of expertise, it's like the angel was the CEO of a huge corporation of angels and would hand it off to that particular department for that angel or entity to answer.
So you had a little committee up there that were supporting.
Committee.
Yeah.
I like your word.
Very nice.
Thank you for your answer.
Yes. Lovely.
Okay. Yeah, Heidi, is your question a burning one that you have to have answered right now? Okay. I'm going to turn off the recording.